Good morning. All right. Yeah. So as David said at the beginning of service, we are going to be starting, and we kind of do this at the beginning of the new year usually, where we go these 4 phrases that you see on this banner over here. And so that's what we're going to be doing over the course of the next 4 weeks. Just kind of go through this before we start our next big sermon series. More on that later. So today we're going to be starting at the top here. We're going to be going with worship. And you maybe think yourself, so then what am I doing up here? But we thought we would shake it up a little. But even if you're new or you've been coming here forever, I think it's good that we always point back to this banner so you all understand that we are a church that worships God passionately, connect with each other authentically. We grow to know God deeply, and we go and we declare the gospel boldly. Now, these are not rules, they're not regulations, they're just simply kind of ideas that we have a church say, like, these are kind of our guardrails. These are kind of how we just approach Christian life. This is what we do as a church, right? So, like I said, this morning we're going to be talking about worship. Now, there are a few commentators that try to break up this word, worship, right? And they'll try to break it up, and what they'll do is they'll take the worship part of it, and they'll just call that worth, right? So then you end up saying, what? Worship is nothing but worth-ship, right? And the idea of the word ship there at the end is you ascribe to, right? That's what the portion of that word means. So you are ascribing worth to something when you worship it. That's the idea. Kind of like if you had you were doing leadership, okay? You are ascribing that person as a good leader, right? You're saying, I recognize you as a leader because you have good leadership, right? Or ownership. If you are giving that over, you're saying that, yeah, I own this thing, so therefore I have ownership. I now have the power and authority over this. Worth-ship. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's what a lot of commentators will do. And they'll say that that's what this is. We are ascribing value or ascribing worth to this thing, so therefore we are worshiping it. I, on the other hand, don't fully agree with that interpretation. And you can believe what it is. If that helps you kind of frame it in your mind, so where you can get there, that's great. There's nothing necessarily bad about that. But what I think it's good is for us to recognize the posture that puts us in. What that puts us in is this idea that there is something that I have the power to do, meaning that when it comes to worshiping God, I am able to give him worth. I am able to give him value because I'm ascribing that to him. But what we need to realize is he already has that worth. And he already has that power. And he already has that value. We are just simply recognizing it. Now, you may say that I'm splitting hairs. Sure, whatever. But I think it's worth mentioning, right? I think it's an important step for us to come to. It's just he doesn't need us to ascribe anything to him, right? He is worthy, he is powerful, and he is great. Period. And we just recognize that. 1 Chronicles 29:11. I love this verse. Yours, O Lord, is the greatness and the power and the glory and the victory and the majesty. And, right? It just keeps going there. For all that is in the heavens and the earth is yours. Period. Right? So yeah, you may say, maybe that's splitting hairs for you. Maybe that is a helpful frame in your brain to kind of be like, well, I'm ascribing value to this thing, so therefore I'm able to get there. And sure, if that's helpful, that's fine. But I think it's important from a heart standpoint, from a posture standpoint, you understand that if I am ascribing value to a thing in that way, it can make it where God's no more than an idol in your life, instead of actually defining who he is. The ancient Israelites were able to assign and ascribe value to a golden calf. That didn't make it God. You understand the difference there? So I think that's important as we move forward. The other thing that we need to understand moving forward is the idea of majesty. Before we get there, I think something that we could use as a framework. Can we bring up that next slide real quick? I think this is a good, if you're into definitions, I think this is a decent one, okay? So worship is humility. It's not ascribing value. It's not giving God more value in any way. You're actually humbling yourself. You're lowering yourself before the majesty of God or the greatness of God. We'll get there here in a second. Accepting your smallness and his greatness. You're putting God in his proper place in your life. That's worship. Okay? But let's talk about this word majesty a little bit more as we see it in this definition. It's his majesty, and therefore you're talking about the greatness of God. And so we have these verses in Psalm, and then Peter kind of talks about it. We're just going to talk about this for a second. Psalm 93 says, the Lord reigns and he is robed in majesty. So not only is he great, but he's robed in greatness, right? There's layers to this. It just keeps going and going, right? God is covered in greatness. Psalm 145:5. Oh, the glorious splendor of your majesty, your greatness, and on your wondrous works I will meditate. So whenever we talk about this idea of meditate, sometimes it has kind of a negative connotation, right? But meditate is just simply, you're just thinking and you're pondering and you're just letting your mind just completely envelop everything that is the majesty and the wondrous nature of who God is, what he has done. Like, this is pretty easy if you think about it like at a sunset or something. You just sit there and you just let yourself just kind of take it in. The wondrous and the majesty of the creation of God, right? You're not worshiping the creation. Don't get me wrong. You're not worshiping the creation. You're worshiping God because of the beauty of his creation. Because it is a mirror, it is a reflection of who he is, right? So you're just meditating. You're letting yourself just soak that in. And it takes your thoughts and it brings it right towards the throne, the majesty of God. Okay, keep going. Peter, during the transfiguration, or after the transfiguration, he said that we were eyewitnesses of his majesty, that powerful light that just came out, that radiated from Christ, right? That majesty of his, that greatness. In the book of Hebrews, chapter 1, verse 3, we see Christ lifted up and sitting at the right hand of the majesty of God, that the throne of Christ is forever and ever and ever. He doesn't need anything from us. He doesn't need anything from us. That's not what we're talking about when we talk about worship. You are humbly submitting yourself to the greatness, the majesty of God. Understanding that you are small and he is great. And what he does with that difference, how great he is, how small he is, what he does with that is love you. That's what he does with that power. Psalm 8, verses 3 through 4. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have set in place, what is mankind? You are mindful of them. Human beings, that you care for them. All the greatness, all the power of God, and he chooses to care for us, to love us, to give us everything we see. This is God. This is the God we worship in humble submission. And maybe this is the hindrance for you. Maybe the framing it in the mind of saying, I can give God value. I can give God this, 30 minutes at the beginning of Sunday service. I can give him this portion of myself and ascribe value to God during this time or whatever, right? Because this lets me put God in this little box, in this little container, so I know where he is, and this is how I worship, and this is my thing, right? And your hindrance in that is actually you are unable, or you're unwilling, or you just can't fathom this idea that you actually have to humble yourself before his greatness and before his majesty. Maybe you have trouble being humble. Maybe you don't have the perspective of who he is. And I get it. I'm the kind of person I like to have it all figured out. I like to have the boxes. I like spreadsheets, that kind of thing. I like numbers. I like 1 + 2 = 3. I like all that kind of stuff, but unfortunately, that's not how faith works. Unfortunately, that's just not how it works. Growing up, when we're talking about worship, growing up, I attended several churches that were more animated in their worship. They were just more expressive. in their worship. Not that we do anything bad here or anything like that. Don't hear that. But they were just more expressive. Okay. You would even use the term charismatic. Has anyone ever heard that term before? Yeah. Okay. So I grew up in a charismatic church, and whenever you would attend such a service, you would see that multiple people in the church, everything, they would all have different ways to worship, but each of them were equally kind of expressive and outwardly and all this kind of thing, right? And it always reminded me. Does anyone know who Tim Hawkins is? Yeah, okay. Really? Not that many people know who Tim Hawkins is? Oh my goodness. Get on YouTube. Like, whatever. Okay, anyway, so Tim Hawkins, Christian comedian, Christian stand-up comedian, right? And always reminded me, have you ever seen his stand-up when he talks about the different types of worship and the different types of ways that people raise their hands? Yeah, Riley knows what I'm talking about. So, okay, I love that skit not because, yes, it's funny. It is very funny, but it's so true. It is so true how everyone has their own style. And whenever you attend, like I said, more of a charismatic church, you see all of them. Every single style you can think of, you're going to see it. I know he goes through a few of them. My personal favorite, probably the one I do a lot, is the warm-up, right? I don't know if you're a warm-up worshiper, or you like this. Yeah, maybe you do the tiptoe. Do you do the tiptoe? Right? I do the tiptoe. That's my thing. I do the tiptoe. I like feeling taller than everybody else, you know. Let's see, another one he does where, man, this thing's heavy, right? Like this, and you stand like that, right? Sure, you lift with your legs, okay, right, like this. Now it's bigger. It's a heavier thing that you're lifting now, right? Has everyone seen these worshipers? Or your neighbor's personal favorite. Your neighbor loves this one. I'll fly away. Right, that? So you smack the person next to you, right? And you'll see all of these at a charismatic style church, right? You'll see everything, and everyone will have different things. But the one thing that always made me keep worship and God and Christ and all those things, the thing that always kept me was like this, was the crying. The crying and the emotion. And I'll be honest, like that was always something that made me uncomfortable. It wasn't all the arm raising. It wasn't like, none of that bugged me. Whatever, that's fine. It was the crying. And how people would get just super emotional during these times. Now, I'm talking like I'm 10 years old at this point, right? And they would always get this point where, it was always probably around the second song. That's when people would start to cry and weep and all these kinds of things. And I don't know if you know this about me, but actually deep down I'm a cynic. And don't worry, God's worked on that. There's still times in public he has to like jab me in the side. It's like, fix your face. Like, oh, sorry. That's just naturally me, okay? So whenever I was younger, before Christ actually got a hold of my heart, it was worse. It was really bad. So whenever they would try to explain this to me and say, well, this is the reason why we raise hands, and this is why it's so emotional and everything, I'm like, okay, so you're raising your hand to some superpower in the sky and bawling in front of everybody and embarrassing yourself. This is great. I don't want any part of this. And that was it, right? Like, that's it. I was done. I was like, I don't want any part of it. And then it got worse because then they go up front, right? They'd go up front to the altar. The crying would get worse. It would get louder. But then they would draw a crowd, right? So then like 8 people would come up and they would all start crying with them. And then I'm telling you, again, like I said, 10, 12-year-old Adam is looking at this stuff. It's like, okay, stay away from that part of this building. Don't go up there. I just had no comprehension. I had no want, no desire. Absolutely. Like, no way. I don't cry in front of people. Then I started asking different questions. Instead of asking questions like, what are you doing? It's shifted to, where did they go? Then I started to get curious. Like I said, again, I was about 12-year-old at this point, and I became friends with the worship band at the church. And these guys were cool. You know, one of them played like an old Fender guitar, right? Red, looks like it was just drugged through the mud and everything. That's how you know it's a good Fender guitar, right? Because it just looks horrible. But we'd get up there and we would talk blues music and rock and roll and all this kind of, like, these guys are cool. And not only are they cool, but I'm super cool because I'm up with the worship band, right? I'm the teenager that was allowed on stage, that kind of thing. And these guys, like, we just having this normal conversation. And then we'd sit back, and especially the lead guitarist, his name's Rick. And obviously he wasn't raising hands a whole lot or anything like that, because he was playing, right? But you could just see it. You could just see it on his face. Just all of a sudden, he was gone. He was out of the room, out of the building. I don't know where he went, but there was something with that relationship with him that made me go, where's he going? Because he looks at total peace right now. Where's he going? How do I get there? The question started to change. Christ was starting to do something. And if you've ever experienced that, or seen someone experience that, you know what I'm talking about. And it wasn't until later on, a little later in life, where I was actually at a concert, a Casting Crowns concert. And they actually had to delay the entire show because of rain. And it was a huge crowd. Sarah and I went, and it was like we were in the middle of the crowd, and there was no way of getting away from it, so we just accepted our fate and allowed ourselves to get wet. Just there was nothing else you could do. And so they finally came back on and started playing, and I can't tell you when it happened, maybe about halfway through the concert or something like that. It shifted from what we would say a concert to a full-on worship service. And you could just feel the Spirit just move through that entire crowd. And there was nothing else you could do. Nothing else you could do except for feel compelled to raise your hands in worship. You start asking different questions. Where are they going? What is going on? There's something special here. It's not just about the crying and about the embarrassing look. It's just like, no, they feel compelled and there's nothing else they can do but have maybe an emotional response. They raise their hands. I don't necessarily want us to sit here and compare how we worship compared to other churches or anything like that. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, where do you go? During song service, and it doesn't even have to be song service, right? During praise and worship here at church. It's like when you see that sunset and you're trying to meditate on the majesty of God, whenever you are having fellowship with your brothers and sisters, where do you go? Do you feel so compelled by the Spirit to say, man, there's no way I could do this. There's no way I could bring these kind of people together. There's no way that I could fix this thing in my life. There's no way that I could be this broken and now I'm this healed. Nothing else could do this besides God. And therefore, He's worthy. Therefore, He's great. And therefore, I submit and worship Him. Where do you go? And what is your hindrance? What keeps you from going there? Just remember, God doesn't call you to an emotion. He calls you to devotion. And that's a difference, right? You're not submitting because you are just so emotionally overwhelmed by the throne. Maybe some of you are, and that's great. That's fine. Everything. But it's not even that. It's like, I pledge my devotion to this. And if you're more like me, it just makes sense. It's just a logical thing you come to. He's bigger than me. I can tell you where they go. And I think the best picture of this is actually in Revelation 5. So if you go ahead and turn there, I haven't had you turn anywhere yet, but I do want us to turn there. We're going to go through this. We're going to read the first 10 verses of Revelation 5, and we're going to keep in mind that this is one of the first windows, right, like that, if you want to go this way, or a peek behind the curtain that John gets in the book of Revelation. And, okay, we already got it going. And this is one of the first ones we get, okay? Do I have that right there? I do have it there. Okay, yeah, we're verses 1 through 10. Let's go ahead and read this. Verse 1. Then I saw in the right hand of him who was seated on the throne a scroll written within and on the back, sealed with 7 seals. And I saw a mighty angel proclaiming with a loud voice, "Who is worthy to open the scroll and break its seals?" And no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth was able to open the scroll or to look into it. And I began to weep loudly because no one was found worthy to open the scroll or to look into it. And one of the elders said to me, "Weep no more. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has conquered, so that he can open the scroll and its 7 seals. Verse 6. And between the throne and the 4 living creatures, and among the elders, I saw a lamb standing, as though it had been slain, with 7 horns and with 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God, sent out into all the earth. And he went and took the scroll from the right hand of him who was seated on the throne. And when he had taken the scroll, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, each holding a harp and golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. And they sang a new song, saying, Worthy are you to take the scroll and to open its seals, for you were slain, and by your blood you ransomed people for God, from every tribe and every language and people and nation. Verse 10, and you have made them a kingdom and priests to our God, and they shall reign on the earth. This is where they go. This is where you go. There's a lot of imagery happening here. And let me just say this. This is not a sermon about the book of Revelations. This is a sermon about worship. So there's a lot of things that we're just not going to get into. Okay? But in general, you see this grand picture of a throne room. And you see all of these elders, and you see these crazy-looking creatures, and you see a bunch of stuff happening here. But it all has a focal point. It all has a center. And that's what we're going to focus on. Not all this potential other stuff that's happening or anything like that. Not that it's not important. It's just we don't got time for that. We're going to focus. We're going to make the number one thing the number one thing. And we understand that through this text, there is only one that is worthy. Right? So AI is fun, if done properly, by the way. This is an image that AI generated to just kind of give us an idea of what the throne room could look like. Now, this is not obviously the throne room, okay? Just like if we were watching The Chosen, right? We understand that Jonathan, the actor that plays Jesus, is not Jesus. We understand that, right? Please say yes. Okay, thank you. All right, so we understand that he's not actually Jesus. Okay, this is not actually the throne room, okay? But this, hopefully, can spark some imagination for you, right? Hopefully can get you there. There's actually a second photo. Depending on how you prompt it, it can tell you different things. All that. Personally, I like the first one more. Joe, which one you like more? Leave up whichever one you like more. I don't care. Okay, so what I really like about this is how it shows all the elders and their thrones and everything, and it's all centered and focused on one thing: the throne of God. That's what I like about this particular one. So let's understand what we're seeing here. We see the 24 thrones. I didn't count it, so I don't know if AI did it correctly, but 24 thrones, which represent like the 12 tribes of Israel. It represents the 12 apostles, okay? And what this actually shows us, if you want to get into the imagery of it, it shows us how God works through the people on earth, right? He works through his people. He works through God's people, right? That's what that kind of represents, okay? And then you have these crazy-looking creatures flying around. And what we would be tempted to be, if we didn't have the context of this text or anything like that, if we were to see these these creatures just kind of around, okay? Maybe you're like going through the woods or something like that, and you see one of these pop up in front of you. It's like, I don't know, if you're hunting or something, I don't know if you would just bow down or whatever, or Hollis, Missouri, you like to hunt. Maybe you take the shot. I don't know. But it's what we do here is we see that these are these great things that we would be tempted ourselves to worship them. But what do we see? All affection, all attention, all worship is being centered into one place, and that is the throne of God. And these creatures, as you can see, have different features. They represent different animals, stuff like that. What the imagery kind of points us to is it just represents creation. It represents creation. So we see all people. We're not the only ones worshiping. Creation itself worships God. We don't have to do anything. It's just happening. Romans 8:22 tells us that actually all of creation, the whole of creation is groaning. It's groaning to be made right. So we're not the only ones in this throne room. Like even they have the sense to worship God. So we don't see God in this as just creator. We also see him as redeemer. I want to read. And we all began to weep loudly. This is in verse 4. You don't have to go back to the verse. I just want to read it real quick. It says, "Weep no more. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has conquered." Jesus is the Lion. He is the conquering King. He is mighty, and he is worthy of praise. But then we don't get that. That's not the image that pops out. What happens? Wait a minute, hold on. And between the creatures, oh my gosh, there's a lamb standing. He's the conquering, roaring lion, conquering king, and that's not the image we get. What makes Jesus worthy? It is not the lion. It is not the conquering king. It's not 8-pound swaddled baby. Jesus, it's the slain lamb. Jesus is worthy because he died for you. Jesus is worthy because he paid the greatest sacrifice with his life on a cross, and his blood makes you worthy to stand in the presence of God and make you right in front of him. Jesus is worthy because he was slain. That's how he breaks the seals. Now, there's a lot of, again, commentary and ideas on what the scroll represents, what's on the scroll, what the seals represent, and blah, 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 blah. Forget that. Don't worry about that. Focus on the one thing. It doesn't matter what's on the scroll. It doesn't matter what the seals represent. None of that matters. What matters is Jesus is worthy to open it. Because he is the slain lamb. Because he died for you. That's what makes him worthy. Not any value you ascribe to him, like we said at the beginning, right? There is nothing I can do that I give to Jesus that allows him to open this scroll. He does that. He sacrificed for who he is as the Son of God. He is worthy. Recently, I read a quote, and it's from a book. I love the title. "Your God is Too Small." It's by J.P. Phillips. And it says, "Most adults don't know how to worship because they haven't found a God big enough for their problems." That looks pretty big. If you struggle with submitting to the majesty of God and the greatness that he has and the worthiness that Christ has, if you struggle to submit to that, you're right, your God's not going to be big enough. Because more than likely you've made your own God. I can get distracted, for sure. I can get distracted by my to-do lists. I can get distracted by, you know, kids, whatever. But sometimes, man, maybe you can get distracted by just simple vanity. I don't want to fully let myself go. I don't want to fully submit to the God of the universe. I don't want to fully submit to this because what will people think? It'd be so embarrassing to raise my hand at church. No guilt, no anything like that. Again, it's a heart thing. Are you going there? Because when you go there, it feels like you don't have another choice except for bow. It's the only choice you have. And here's the other flip side to this. Like, yeah, there's submission. There's part of this where it humbles us. But the other thing is, like, Christian, listen to me. Like, if you look at that, and that's your king, if that's your kingdom, because this is happening now, right? This isn't something that happened 2,000 years ago, right? It doesn't happen 5,000 years from now. This is happening right now, right? That's how the spirit world works, right? There's no time. Okay, let's just go with that. Okay, so this is happening right now. Jesus is worthy right now. That is our King right now. And if this is reality right now, what do you have to fear? What can they do to you? What can anyone do to you? Like just how Paul says it in Philippians, I think is where he said. He goes, to die is gain. What can they do to you? We don't have the spirit of fear because that's our King. That's our God. So you go from this and you like, what else are you going to do? But yet we still find a way to do it. We all go around and we end up making our own little baby small thrones that we worship. And maybe for you that is vanity. I could see that being for me. Right? I was like, oh, I don't want some people to see me raise my hand. What if they make fun of me? Right? Like that could be me. Vanity, absolutely. Like I said earlier, like I still struggle with being cynical sometimes. Yeah, there's my little baby throne. All right, I take these little baby thrones, I set them all around me, and this is how I define my world. I use my own throne that I created, and I use that to define sexuality. I use that to define how I spend my time. I use that throne to define what I watch on TV. I use that throne to define what I drink, or how much I drink, or when I drink it, or whatever like that. I use that to define how I go on vacations. I use that to however I want to spend my time. And we all do this. We all have our own little baby thrones that we focus on, and then for some reason, we put so much value into this that we miss that. What's your baby throne? What keeps you from going there? As we close, I want us to think about something else. Right before this scene in Revelation 5, at the very end of Revelation 4, we see these creatures and they're singing, holy, holy, holy. Because that's what they're created to do. They don't have a choice. It's just what they do. But then you have man, and they say, worthy are you, our Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they existed and were created. Unlike these creatures that we'd be like, oh man, look how great those are. Those are awesome, right? They have no choice but to worship God. Glory, glory, glory. You have a choice. You get to see all of creation. You get to see everything that God has created, right? You to receive glory, honor, and power, for you created all things. All things existed through you. You get to use your brain, and you get to use your senses to recognize that God is worthy, that Jesus is worthy. Not because of anything you've done, not because of anything you can give him, he just is. And because he is worthy, can we bring that definition back up? And because he is worthy, we are humble before the majesty of God, accepting our smallness and his greatness. As the worship team comes back up, you get to choose. You get to choose if you're going to worship the small baby throne that you've created, that you use to define your world and put in boxes, including God himself. You try to define him and put him in his own little box because he fits on this throne that I can control and define. Or you can choose to submit that maybe he's greater than you are. That maybe he actually has all majesty. He's robed in majesty. And you come to that realization that there's nothing else I can do except for bow. And maybe bowing looks different. Maybe it means raising your hands in worship. Maybe it means the tippy toe thing, right? But it's all a bow. So this week, let's think about ways we don't bow. Things that make it where we don't submit to God. Maybe it is fear. Maybe there's things in your life that's happening that you don't understand, that is just causing uncertainty in you, and therefore you're afraid. When your God looks like that, there's nothing to be afraid of. So as Nathan starts playing, I want to invite us all to worship. Invite us all to submit and bow to the one that is worthy, the slain lamb that died for you. Stand and worship.